Hello and welcome to the final part of our series on the rise of the authoritarian superpower known as the European Union. Last time we saw the Axis powers defeat the Allies and then the Chinese bloc. However, just as one war ended, the seeds of the next war were already being laid, as Germany and Franco-Spain divided all territories between them, cutting the Empire of Japan out. With Japan furious at this betrayal, and Germany and Franco-Spain unwilling to allow another foreign power to threaten their hegemony of the world, battle plans were already being drawn. Invasion plans already being laid out months previously as the war in China still raged. However, this was not going to be an easy invasion. Japan's navy was strong and battle-hardened after facing the American Pacific Fleet, and her troops were veterans of a long campaign in China, with hundreds of divisions spread throughout mainland Japan and her holdings on the Asian continent. The first salvo of the brewing war was fired on May 23, 1945, where Japan was unilaterally kicked out of the Axis powers. However, she took with her her puppets of Latvia and Estonia, allowing Japan to hold a knife to the throat of Central Europe. The Axis powers immediately began building up for the war to come, Germany rebuilding her stockpiles, notably of nuclear munitions, while Franco-Spain set about a four-pronged effort. The first was to build a massive series of airfields all over eastern China, turning the entire coastline into a massive aerial battery, able to house both the Luftwaffe and the Franco-Spanish Royal Air Force. At the same time, it was feared that complete air superiority may not be achieved, and so a new weapon of war had been secretly under development. Ballistic rocket sites were manufactured all over the Chinese coastline, and continuous research over the past few years had allowed these weapons to go from small rockets that could cross maybe 100 miles to massive intercontinental ballistic missiles, able to hit continents far away, allowing the entirety of mainland Japan to be targeted. And these missiles were manufactured and aimed at key sites in Japan, notably her coastal defences and anti-air bases. And in August 1945, the Franco-Spanish suddenly realised that they had never fully mobilised their economy. Barely moving out of a civilian economy, many of the rural lands of France had barely even noticed the war. But with fears of a protracted conflict soon coming, this was quickly rectified and a partial mobilisation effort was taken. Finally, it was obvious to all that the war at sea would decide this coming conflict. Without naval superiority, Japan could not be invaded. But Franco-Spain had long been building up her arsenal of battleships, including the new pride of the fleet, the Legrand, a massive battleship able to compete with the Japanese Yamato. These preparations lasted many months until finally, on the 16th of March 1946, the Axis powers declared war on their one-time allies. Germany claimed the provinces of Latvia and Estonia. Japan, realizing that this claim was simply a prelude to an eventual invasion, sided with her puppet states and joined in the war. But it was now that Japan revealed her hidden hand. Although Estonia and Latvia could not provide many troops themselves, Japan had been sending many of her own troops into this little enclave, and German commanders on the front line soon heard reports of 60 enemy divisions in Estonia, including Japanese heavy tank divisions. The small German divisions assigned to the region quickly found themselves outfaced, and they began to be pushed back, fears suddenly spreading through the Axis powers that Berlin might fall to Estonian divisions. However, as fate would have it, 13 newly trained divisions of the Breakthrough Army were passing by the region on their way to the new front lines in China, and these Franco-Spanish heavy divisions quickly redeployed, with their brand new super heavy tanks in tow. With these reinforcements, the German divisions quickly pushed back, and soon Latvia collapsed, followed by a steady retreat of the Estonian divisions. In the Asian theatre, the war started with massed naval bombers. Wings exceeding 1,000 aircraft took to the skies around the Japanese coastline, sinking any convoys they came across, crippling Japanese war efforts, while at the same time these groups harassed Japanese naval formations in the region. At the same time, the Japanese home islands were subjected to a massive air campaign, starting with over 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles raining down on their vital shore defences and anti-air batteries, opening the way for the Luftwaffe. But still, the Axis powers knew they had to take control of the seas in order to launch their invasion, and in an effort to draw out the Japanese battle fleet for a final engagement, the Franco-Spanish Navy started harassing any Japanese troops in the area. Japan rapidly came off bloodied in these first skirmishes, losing numerous small screen ships for very little damage to the Franco-Spanish. The decimation of their patrol fleets brought out the main Japanese carrier fleet, and off the coast of Japan, the Franco-Spanish Royal Navy and the Japanese Imperial Navy duked it out. This, however, would be a one-sided affair, and for a loss of only 5 destroyers, the Franco-Spanish sunk a Japanese aircraft carrier, battlecruiser, and heavy cruiser, along with numerous escorts. Worse still, the Japanese fleet broke apart, sending many of their damaged ships home alone with little escort. These were then picked apart by the light Franco-Spanish patrol fleets operating in the area, first sinking a heavy cruiser and then the battleship Fuso, before scoring their ultimate victory when a task group of 8 destroyers engaged the Japanese flagship, the Soryu, sinking the carrier and her single destroyer escort before she could return to docks for repairs. Japanese naval power had been tested and found wanting, and this once and for all proved that the aircraft carrier was a mere fad and the battleship would remain supreme until the modern day. Meanwhile, in a sign of things to come, a stalemate on the front around Beijing was broken. Having seen the success of tactical nuclear weapons in the war in China, the Luftwaffe deployed them en masse. Heavy Japanese fortifications north of Beijing were annihilated in a series of fireballs, nuclear explosions raining down for hundreds of kilometers. The shocked survivors of this attack were soon faced with the Franco-Spanish breakthrough divisions, super heavy tanks driving through the nuclear wasteland. Japanese opposition on the continent quickly collapsed. Attention now shifted to the Japanese islands themselves. With the remains of the Japanese Navy in hiding, the way was clear, and both German and Franco-Spanish armies were launched on their invasions. The Japanese defenders, although numerous, had faced a full month of constant bombardment, first by rocket attacks and then by the might of the Luftwaffe. And although they were able to repel one attack, multiple armies landed all around the coast. By the 2nd of May, Nagasaki had fallen, and the Axis powers had secured a major foothold. The German Führer, however, was not content with the pace of events, and feared his landings might be cut off. Unwilling to wait for the Franco-Spanish troops to advance, he unleashed Operation New Sun. Dozens of nuclear weapons were deployed all over Japan, hitting every major city and all along the new front lines. In one dire twist of fate, Franco-Spanish troops would break into the port of Osaka on the morning of the bombing. Unable to contact the strategic bombers, there was no way to call off the attack, and the 8 freshly victorious divisions were subjected to the worst friendly fire incident in world history, as the nuclear bomb went off, levelling Osaka. Yet despite this setback, the bombings were otherwise a vast success, and Japanese resistance collapsed across the home islands, scattered and exhausted divisions fleeing in every direction. Although exact casualty figures vary, it is estimated that at this point in the war, Japan had lost 2.5 million men. 2 months into the invasion, Japan was all but crippled. With Japanese seaports falling by the day, the Japanese carrier Akagi made a break for Okinawa. She would never arrive, as she was set upon by almost 2,000 Franco-Spanish and German naval bombers, who ripped the Akagi apart, leaving her escort severely damaged. Hitler, however, was determined to sink the Japanese super battleship the Yamato. Franco-Spanish intelligence suggested she might be harbouring in Tokyo. With no further evidence, Hitler ordered a nuclear strike. For the second time, Tokyo was hit with a nuclear weapon. However, as Tokyo fell days later, no sign of the Yamato was found. Indeed, on the 7th of July 1946, Franco-Spanish scout planes located the remains of the Japanese fleet, which had been harbouring in Okinawa. But before nuclear bombers could be scrambled, a day later, the Empire of Japan signed her unconditional surrender. And so finally, on the 8th of July, 1946, the Second Great War came to an end. With millions dead and fighting on every continent, this had been the greatest, most spectacular, and most bloody war in history. And it had left clear victors in the Axis powers, or as they were renamed, the European Union. Franco-Spain and Germany dominated the world, with Germany occupying most of the northern hemisphere, Franco-Spain taking most of the south. European hegemony over the world had been achieved, and it would remain until this very day. And there we end our series. I hope you have enjoyed this look into how the European Union truly came to be. And if not for some unlikely series of events, who knows what history might have turned out as. But for now, I have been Dr. J. Ebus, and this has been the entire history of the rise of the European Union. Thank you, and good day.